news tonight. His Majesty the King telephones U.S. President Barack Obama to congratulate him on his re-election, saying his victory reflects the American people's confidence in his leadership. The Prime Minister says the challenging economic and fiscal conditions in Jordan have forced the government to take decisive measures, namely to float the price of oil derivatives. Israel and the Palestinians stepped from the brink of a new war in the Gaza Strip, sending signals to each other that they would hold their fire unless attacked. Strikes on the Turkish border with Syria cause some of the biggest refugee movement of the conflict and trigger a tough stance from the Turkish side. Good evening, you're watching the news at 10. His Majesty King Abdullah telephoned the re-elected U.S. President Barack Obama to congratulate him on his victory in the election, which he said reflects the American people's confidence in his leadership. His Majesty said he is keen to continue coordination and consultation with the U.S. administration on what King Abdullah described as unprecedented challenges facing the Mideast region especially. The King said the two foremost pressing issues are a two-state solution for the Palestinian problem and the crisis in Syria. King Abdullah said a U.S. role is crucial for the resumption of Palestinian-Israeli talks that would handle all remaining final status issues. The telephone conversation also touched on the excellent Jordanian-U.S. relations and the friendly ties that exist between the two peoples. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Jordan Armed Forces, visited a unit of the 30th Hussein bin Ali Paratrooper Brigade. The King was briefed on duties and tasks of the brigade, as well as ongoing training programs for paratroopers. He hailed the high level of fitness and combat readiness of the unit's members. On arrival at the unit, His Majesty was received by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mashal Mohammed Zabin, and the brigade's commander. The economic and fiscal condition is very critical and has forced the government to float the prices of fuel derivatives effective tonight. This and more was divulged by Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour in an interview with Jordan Television today, broadcast during the main Arabic news bulletin. Mansour said the appropriate decision under the current circumstance had to be taken and listed the factors that led to a challenging economic situation in Jordan. He said an interruption in Egyptian gas supplies has so far cost the kingdom 1 billion Jordanian dinars that, among other factors such as delayed foreign and Arab aid, has increased budget deficit and raised the kingdom's foreign debt. Accordingly, and in today's cabinet session, a decision was taken to revisit the prices of oil derivatives as follows. The price of octane 90 will be 800 fils per litre. The price of diesel will be 685 fils per litre. The price of kerosene will be 685 fils per litre. And the price of gas cylinder will be 10 dinars. The Prime Minister said the floating of fuel prices will enable the government to better channel assistance in the form of direct cash to low and middle-income families. Families with an income of less than 10,000 dinars will receive cash assistance at the rate of 70 dinars per individual, but not exceeding 6 individuals, whereby total assistance per family is not above 420 dinars. Cash assistance will be handed out to families in 3 payments. Beneficiaries include civil servants working in the civic and military sectors, as well as pensioners, private sector employees, families and individuals receiving national aid funds and employed. According to the cabinet decision, consultations are to follow to decide how the cash payment will be channeled to beneficiaries. Cash assistance continues so long as the price of oil per barrel tops $100 ceiling. The price of subsidized bread should not be affected by the hike in fuel prices, Rates of public transport will be modified in accordance with the new floated fuel prices. Israel and the Palestinians stepped back from the brink of a new war in the Gaza Strip, sending signals to each other via that they would hold their fire unless attacked after 5 days of mounting violence. Israel struck 3 targets in the Gaza Strip in the early hours today, despite a marked decrease in rocket fire from Gaza. Israel reacted by saying it would decide when and how to react to ongoing cross-border violence. Lays Shankiti has the details with the following reports.
The Israeli military said its warplanes successfully hit a weapons storage facility in central Gaza and 2 rocket launching sites in the north of the coastal enclave. Israel was targeting 3 sites in the Gaza Strip when it struck in the early hours of today, although there has been a significant decrease in rocket fire from Palestinian fighters. No casualties were reported following the loud pre-dawn blasts. Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak said Israel would decide when and how to react to ongoing cross-border violence with Gaza.
The matter has definitely not ended, and we will decide how and when to act at the time when there will be a need. I do not want to relate to the time or the means, because it would not be right to allow the other side to have this information.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened a meeting of his inner circle of 9 senior ministers to decide what action to take. Netanyahu is under scrutiny as the public push for an end to the regular Gaza flare-ups. Tensions rose sharply on Saturday when 4 Israeli soldiers patrolling the Israeli-Gaza border were wounded. Israel responded with tank fire and airstrikes, killed 6 Palestinians, including 4 civilians, and left at least 40 wounded. 8 Israelis were wounded by Palestinian rocket fire. Lay Shankiti for the news at 10.
Preparations are underway to exhume the body of late Palestinian President Yasser Arafat as part of an investigation. The former leader died. Palestinian security cordoned off the grave as they prepared for the exhumation process, starting with the removal of the mausoleum's glass and its marble tombstone. Palestinian officials say the process could take up to 2 weeks due to the delicate work to be done by hand. French and Swiss experts are due to exhume the body after suspicions a former leader was killed by a rare radioactive poison. 3 French forensic experts are expected to visit Arafat's tomb in the West Bank city of Ramallah on the 20th, and investigating magistrates to visit 4 days later. Over to Syria, and newly released data from UNHCR states that at least 2.5 million Syrians are believed to have fled their homes since the start of unrest in the country. Officials say the number is double previous estimates. In recent days, airstrikes on the town of Ras Al Ain near the Turkish border have caused some of the biggest refugee movements of the conflict and have triggered a tough Turkish stand. Raid Btush has more.
The second day of jet strikes sent Syrians scurrying through the flimsy barbed wire fence that divides Ras Al Ain from the Turkish settlement of Ceylanpınar as thick plumes of smoke rose above the town. A Syrian warplane struck homes in the town of Ras Al Ain within sight of the Turkish border, pursuing an aerial bomb to force out rebels. Opposition activists say at least a dozen people died yesterday, and the casualty toll of today is still unknown. Medical workers and refugees in Ceylanpınar said bombing yesterday and today struck residential areas of Ras Al Ain, which fell to rebels last week, and advanced into Syria's mixed Arab and Kurdish northeast. A Turkish health official at the hospital in Ceylanpınar said rebel fighters pulled the wounded from under the rubble of houses. Refugees say the fighters are taking cover in homes, many of them abandoned by residents who have fled Turkey. The offensive has caused some of the biggest refugee movements since the armed revolt against President Bashar al-Assad began in March last year and brought the war back perilously close to Turkish soil. As the spillover of violence on the Turkish-Syrian border gets worse, Ankara is mulling to secure its border with Syria from any further cross-border violence. Addressing deputies of his AK party, Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan stressed that Ankara would not hesitate to respond to any Syrian threat to his country.
We are giving the necessary response on the border and will not refrain from a much harsher response if necessary. Nobody should play with fire or try to test Turkey's patience.
Turkey has repeatedly fired back in retaliation for stray gunfire and mortar rounds flying across its 900-kilometer border with Syria, and is talking to NATO allies about the possible deployment of Patriot surface-to-air missiles. Ankara says this would be a defensive step, but it could also be a prelude to enforcing a no-fly zone in Syria to limit the reach of the Syrian military's air power. But Western powers have so far been reluctant to take such a step. Ra'ad Btoush for the news at 10.
Meanwhile, Iran said it will host a Syrian National Dialogue meeting next week under the slogan "No to Violence, Yes to Democracy." The official IRNA news agency quoted Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian saying that aside from representatives from different ethnic groups, political parties, minorities and the opposition, there will also be representatives from the government at the meeting. There was no mention if the Syrian National Coalition would attend the talks in Tehran. Arab and EU foreign ministers discussed a host of issues on Arab-European cooperation in Cairo, with a focus on the Syrian crisis and a Palestinian bid for non-member statehood at the United Nations. Foreign Minister Nasser Joudeh took part in the meeting hosted by the Arab in the Egyptian capital. 17 European and 20 Arab ministers attended the meeting, which also tackled latest developments relating to the Arab Spring. The ministers deliberated the possibility of an international recognition for the newly united Syrian opposition as a government in waiting, announced on Sunday in Doha. EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton said the opposition must be inclusive of all the people of Syria and must be determined in the offer they make to the people. For the most part, they agreed that the Syrian opposition coalition is a positive step. British Foreign Secretary William Hague said more needed to be done before Britain formally recognized it.
We are not excluding any option for the future because this desperately serious crisis is getting worse and worse all the time. But our approach has been to give non-lethal support. Opposition, that is how it stands today, and of course to send more humanitarian assistance to the hundreds of thousands of people who have fled over the Syrian border. So we hope they will now implement the agreement in detail and that we will be able to go on to recognize them as the legitimate representatives of the people of
Arab League Secretary General Nabil Al-Arabi told the meeting that the Palestinian bid for statehood is essential for the peace process to succeed.
And because all of the avenues for peace are shut, it is necessary to establish a Palestinian state this year through the General Assembly as a non-member state observer. And this demand is a project that supports the two-state solution that the international community is calling for, unfortunately with not enough determination. And this is not opposed to the necessity to begin serious negotiations, and therefore it cannot be considered a unilateral action.
Radical Muslim cleric Abu Qatada returned to his home in London after being released on bail from a UK prison. He was released after winning an appeal against deportation to face terrorism charges here in Jordan. A UK court ruled yesterday for Qatada to be released under bail conditions, including a 16-hour curfew at his London home, although the Conservative-led government says he is a huge security risk. The special said British Interior Minister Theresa May was wrong not to revoke an earlier deportation ruling against Qatada and allowed his appeal. Qatada was arrested 10 years ago and has been in and out of jail in Britain for 7 years without charges. Around 2,000 Greeks gathered in central Athens to protest against government plans for public sector layoffs in the wake of the latest round of austerity measures. The civil servants protesting austerity have had their wages reduced by as much as 40% during the past 2 years, and government is planning further reductions. The plan also foresees at least 8,000 jobs lost by next year. The Greek government implemented the unpopular measures last week, hoping to unlock over 31 billion euros in aid from the International Monetary Fund and a European Union bailout that has been on hold for months. In Brussels, meanwhile, Greek Prime Minister Antonis Samaras met EU Commission President to discuss the importance of economic development in Greece and the EU budget. Samaras' visit to Brussels came just a day after Eurozone ministers agreed that debt-ridden Greece has made enough progress to unfreeze the next tranche of the country's emergency loan, but stopped short of making a final decision on the matter. Athens is scrambling to meet a €5 billion bond repayment deadline on Friday, but EU officials say they were confident that it would not default. In Italy, 3 people died when their car fell off a collapsed bridge as flooding forced part of the country's main north-south highway to close. Tuscany and the neighboring Umbria region were devastated by severe flooding as heavy rains caused rivers to burst their banks in several areas. Flooding washed out many secondary roads, forced hundreds of people to leave their homes and isolated several towns. In Venice, however, water levels were receding as the lagoon saw its worst flooding since 1872. The flooding alert is now centered for the area north of Rome, where officials fear the Tiber and the Anene River could burst their banks in low-lying areas outside the center of the capital. People across India reveled in the festive spirit of Diwali, lighting up their homes to mark the lavish celebrations. The 5-day event is often known as the Festival of Lights because houses and public places are decorated with small oil lamps. Cities across India lit up their streets and people gathered at temples to seek blessings from God during the festival. Diwali is also considered the perfect time for souvenir shopping as people purchase earthen lamps, sweets and other decorative items and attracts a large number of tourists. In the calendar, Diwali is a New Year festival which celebrates the victory of good over evil. Serbia's Novak Djokovic cemented his place as the world's top tennis player at the ATP World Tour Finals. The Serb dethroned Roger Federer in an enthralling showdown and grinding down the Swiss to take the title 7-6, 7-5. Only the 4th time in the tournament's history that the world's top 2 players had contested the final. It is Djokovic's first title at the ATP's blue-ribboned event since 2008 in Shanghai. He pocketed the $1.76 million for going through the tournament with a 100% record, having won all his round-robin matches. Argentina arrived in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia ahead of their friendly match tomorrow. Lionel Messi is among the 22-man squad. Messi, 25, bagged 50 goals in La Liga last season, smashing Real Madrid forward Cristiano Ronaldo's record of 40 from the previous campaign, and was top scorer in the Champions League for an unprecedented 4th straight edition. He is the favorite to claim a 4th consecutive World Player award when the winner is announced in January. The Argentine has a chance to add to his tally when Argentina plays Saudi Arabia tomorrow. Finally, a look at the weather for west, it continues to be relatively cold and partly cloudy tonight with possible fog formation in the late hours and early morning. A slight rise in temperatures is expected tomorrow, creating relatively moderate conditions in most regions. Winds will be southwesterly light, changing to northwesterly moderate. The Gulf of Aqaba expect relatively hot weather with partly cloudy skies and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And for a quick recap of the main headlines. His Majesty the King telephones U.S. President Barack Obama to congratulate him on his re-election, saying his victory reflects the American people's confidence in his leadership. The Prime Minister says the challenging economic and fiscal conditions in Jordan have forced the government to take decisive measures, namely to float the price of oil derivatives. Israel and the Palestinians step back from the brink of a new war in the Gaza Strip, sending signals to each other that they would hold their fire unless attacked. Strikes on the Turkish border with Syria cause some of the biggest refugee movement of the conflict and trigger a tough stance from the Turkish side. That's all the news for tonight. I'm Al Majali. For the latest, join us tomorrow, same time. Have a good night.